cave was 60 feet up a cliff face nobody climbs. I found out why when 3 people lifted their heads out of the dark inside it and looked at me. That was 4 years ago, and there's still a part of the story I have a hard time saying out loud. Not because anyone wouldn't believe me. I don't really care about that part. It's more that when I get to a certain point, my throat just kind of closes up, and I have to stop and start over. But I'm going to try to get through it this time. I'd been thinking about that cliff for a couple months. A face in a gorge in the Appalachians. About 120 feet of broken sandstone with a long diagonal seam running across it that I'd been studying on satellite. If you haven't been out in that part of the country, it's hard to explain how off-grid some of those gorges are. I'm not talking about a state park with a viewing platform. I'm talking about a place where you park on a Forest Service road. You bushwhack 2 hours through Laurel, and then the ground falls out from under you, and you're standing on the rim of something most people don't know exists. I free solo. That's the kind of climbing I do. I'm not a real climber, I'm a scrambler. Class 4 stuff, easy Class 5 if the rock looks clean. I've been doing it about 10 years, and the reason I do it alone is because none of my friends climb. I had my kit dialed in. Approach shoes, climbing shoes, a little hammer tool I use for cleaning holds, water, headlamp, everything I needed. By the second day, I was in. Like all the way in. 2 hours of bushwhacking off a Forest Service road. No cell signal, no people. Just me and the gorge and a whole lot of nothing. And that was the entire point. I'd just gotten out of a 5-year relationship, and I'd taken 3 days off work specifically to not talk to anyone. And being out there felt right. That was before I pulled onto the ledge. It was late morning, maybe 10:30, and I was about 60 feet up the face, working that diagonal seam. The rock was clean. The holds were good. I almost didn't look up. But there was a horizontal break above me that hadn't shown up clearly on satellite, and when I pulled over the lip onto it, it was bigger than I'd thought it would be. A ledge. One of those ones that looks like a thin shelf from below, but turns out to be 6 feet deep. Big enough to lay down on. Big enough that you could sit there with your legs hanging over and have lunch. I've been on a lot of ledges. They're everywhere on these faces. But this one was different. The rock at the back of it was darker than the rock everywhere else, and it ran straight up the wall like a black stripe. I figured it was just shadow. Recessed rock holds the dark even in full sun. I sat down with my back to it to drink some water. I want to be clear about my state of mind because it matters for what comes next. I was not on edge. I wasn't nervous. I was sitting on a ledge with my legs over a 100-foot drop, drinking water, looking out at the trees on the other side of the gorge, thinking about absolutely nothing. The sun was warm. There was no wind. I remember thinking I should come back here in the fall. That was when I noticed the smell. It was faint. That's what made it weird. Strong smells you place right away. Something dead. Something burning. This one wasn't strong and it had layers to it. There was a body smell underneath, like a sleeping bag that hasn't been washed in a long time. And on top of that, there was something cold. Cold and a little chemical, and a little sweet. Not anything you smell outdoors. I've spent a lot of time outdoors. This wasn't an outdoors smell. I sat there with the water bottle halfway to my mouth, trying to figure out where it was coming from. I thought maybe it was coming up from the gorge floor. Sometimes you get weird thermal currents in those gorges. Then I thought it was the wind, and I checked the wind and there wasn't any. And it took me longer than it should have to realize the smell was coming from behind me. I turned around. The dark stripe at the back of the ledge wasn't shadow. It wasn't rock. It was an opening, about 4 feet tall, 3 feet wide, the bottom of it flush with the ledge floor. The kind of opening you'd have to crouch to get through, but you wouldn't have to crawl. And the inside of it went back. It wasn't a recess. It was a hole that kept going. There are caves all through that part of the country. Karst pockets, sandstone shelters, old hunter blinds, bootlegger holes from Prohibition, coal seam openings. I'd ducked into a few over the years for shade or to wait out rain. None of them had ever smelled like that. Look, I want to say something here. I know how this is going to sound. The smart move is to get back on the rock and downclimb and call the trip done and go home. I know that. I knew it then. But I was 28 years old, and I'd just gotten dumped, and I'd come all the way out there to do something nobody had done, and I told myself it was probably just a den. Bear, raccoon, fox, something. I put the headlamp on, lean in for 10 seconds, satisfy my curiosity, keep moving. I put the headlamp on. I didn't crawl in. I want to be clear about that. I knelt at the entrance, and I leaned my upper body forward until just my face was past the lip of the opening, and I had both hands braced on the rock on either side, ready to push myself back out fast. That was the deal. Just my head and shoulders. The rest of me was still on the ledge. The headlamp lit up the floor first. The floor was packed dirt. Not loose dirt. Packed. The way a dirt floor in an old barn gets when people have been walking on it for a long time. Dark and dense and smooth. There were marks in it too. Not footprints. More like long, flat scuffs running parallel to each other. Like somebody had been dragging themselves across the floor. The dirt had a grain to it. The walls of the cave went back further than my headlamp could throw. I'd say about 20 feet of visibility before everything got soft and the light just dissolved. So whatever was past 20 feet, I couldn't see. What I could see was stuff. A pile of plastic bottles stacked along the left wall. A lot of them. Stacked the way you'd stack firewood, in little piles against the rock. I don't know what was in them. There was some kind of fabric draped over something. Whatever was under the fabric, I couldn't tell. A soup can on the floor near the front. The lid bent back. The inside scraped clean. The label was gone. I noticed all of that, fast. The other thing I noticed was the air. The air coming out of the cave was warmer than the air on the ledge. Not by much, by a few degrees. And it was moving. There was a slow draft pushing out of the opening, steady, and the draft was carrying the smell. And the draft meant the cave kept going. Caves with airflow connect to other caves, or to vertical shafts, or to other openings somewhere else in the rock. They don't dead end. So whatever I was looking at the front of something. The back of it was somewhere else. That's when I started to back out. Not because of what I'd seen. The bottles weren't anything. The can wasn't anything. People squat in caves sometimes. That's a real thing in those mountains. There are guys who live off-grid out there. What started me backing out was the air. The fact that the cave kept going past where I could see, and I had no way of knowing what was on the other end of it. I was halfway through pulling my head back when something at the edge of the headlamp beam moved. I'm going to take this part slow, because I've been over it 1,000 times in my head, and I still don't know how to describe it without making it sound like something I made up. The movement was at the very edge of the light. Past where the beam was strong, in the soft part where the headlamp was just dying out. Something pale, low to the ground. It moved maybe a foot. It stopped. It moved a little again. It stopped. I froze. I didn't pull back any further. I didn't go forward. I just held still, with my face in that hole and my hands on the rock. And I watched. For maybe 10 seconds, nothing. The pale shape stayed where it was. I started telling myself I'd seen something else. A piece of fabric shifting in the draft. My own headlamp catching off a bottle. I wanted it to be that. Then it lifted up. It went from being low on the ground to being higher, and it did it slow. And as it came up, the headlamp caught the side of it, and I realized I was looking at a face. Not a clear face. The light wasn't strong enough at that distance, and my headlamp was a cheap one with a cool blue cast that washed everything out. But I could see the shape of a head, the pale curve of a forehead. There was a place where one of the eyes should have been, and I couldn't tell if I was looking at an eye or a hollow. And whatever it was looking at me. I couldn't move. My body did this thing where it just stopped responding to me. The wires got cut. I had my weight on my hands at the entrance and my legs braced behind me on the ledge, and I was kneeling there with my face in this hole, staring at this thing staring back at me. And I could not, physically could not, push myself back. My brain was screaming at my body, and my body was just gone. Then the second one. It was further back, off to the right, and it came up the same way. Slow, like the movement was hard, like it wasn't sure it wanted to be seen yet. The headlamp didn't reach back that far, so all I had was the shape of it lifting, and the suggestion of a head, and the small reflection where eyes would be. Then a third, off to my left, closer than the other two. Maybe 12 feet from me. The headlamp caught this one because of the angle, and that's the one I still see. It was sitting on the floor with its knees pulled up against its chest, except the knees were too high. They were up around its shoulders. The way a body sits when it's been sitting that way for so long it doesn't sit any other way anymore. Its arms were folded around its shins. Its head was tilted forward against its knees, and it was looking at me from underneath, with its eyes coming up over the line of its kneecaps. It wasn't lifting its head to look. It was looking from down there, folded up like a bundle, with the eyes peering out of it. And I had this thought, this really clear, stupid thought, that it had been folded up like that for so long it didn't know how to unfold anymore. That if it tried to stand up, it would just stay folded. I want to say something. They didn't move toward me. They didn't make any noise, none of them. They just lifted up and looked, like I'd walked into a room of people who'd been asleep, except they hadn't been asleep, and they didn't react like people react when you wake them up. They reacted like animals do, like something that had been waiting, and now was paying attention. That's when I could move again. I don't know what changed. I think my body just hit a limit. I shoved back hard with both hands, and I came out of that hole fast, and I went down on my back on the ledge, and I didn't even try to get up smoothly. I half rolled, half scrambled away from the opening with my heels, until my feet were almost off the edge of the ledge, and I had to slap a hand back on the rock to keep myself from going over the side. I sat there with my back against the ledge wall, breathing in this gulping, shallow way that wasn't really breathing, and I watched the hole. I waited for something to come out of it. Nothing did. I don't know how long I sat there. My hands were shaking so bad my fingernails were tapping against the rock. My mouth was dry, like I'd been chewing chalk. I was making a little sound on every exhale that wasn't a word, and wasn't really crying. Just this flat noise that came out every time I let air go. The whole time I was watching the opening, waiting for a hand, waiting for one of them to lean out and look down at me. I'd seen 3. The cave kept going past where my light could reach. The air was moving. So whatever was past the part I'd seen, I had no idea. And the not knowing was almost worse than the seeing. The sun moved to the other side of the gorge. The shadow on the face got longer. And at some point I realized I had to climb down, because I could not stay up there. There was no other way off that ledge. I want you to understand what that climb was like. Free climbing easy rock, the kind I do, depends on you being calm. Your fingers do what your brain tells them to do. Your feet trust the holds. You breathe normal. You move through it. None of that was available to me. My hands were not working right. My feet kept overshooting the holds I was looking at. I had to stop and lock onto the rock 3 or 4 times, and just hang there with my forehead against the stone, trying to get my breathing back. Because if I went down panicking, I was going to fall. That's how climbers die. Not on hard moves. On easy moves, they did wrong, because their head was somewhere else. And the whole time, the opening was above me. I couldn't see it without looking up, and I couldn't look up without losing my line on the rock. But I could feel it. The way you feel somebody standing behind you in a quiet room. Every time I had to reach for a hold above my head, my brain told me a hand was about to come out of that hole and grab my wrist. Every single hold above my head. Nothing came out. Nothing happened. I made it to the trees at the bottom of the face, and I sat down in the leaves with my back against a hemlock, and I cried for a long time. I'm not embarrassed about that. I cried until I was empty, and then I wiped my face on my sleeve, and I looked up at the cliff, and I tried to find the cave opening from below. I couldn't. From the gorge floor, you couldn't see it. The angle of the ledge hid it completely. You'd walk through that whole gorge and never know there was a hole up there. That's when I started thinking about the next person. I sat in those leaves for maybe 10 minutes, thinking about the drive home, and what I was going to tell anybody, and whether I was even going to tell anybody. And in the middle of all that, what kept coming back to me was, somebody else is going to find this face. Somebody else is going to think it looks like a clean line. Somebody else is going to pull onto that ledge. I don't know why it bothered me as much as it did. I'd never met whoever the next person was. I had every reason to just walk out and put it behind me. But I sat there, imagining them coming over the lip of the ledge and turning around to look at the back wall. And my stomach turned over, and I knew I couldn't just leave. So I took the hammer tool out of my pack, the little one I use for cleaning holds, and I walked up to the base of the face, and I picked a spot at eye level where the rock was clean and flat, and I started chipping at it. It took me a long time. The rock was hard. I made one X about a foot across, and then below it, I made another one. 2 of them stacked. That's the climber sign for "Don't climb here." You see those marks at decommissioned routes when bolts have been pulled because somebody died on them. Anyone who'd come out that far to scramble would know what they meant. Then I walked along the base of the cliff until I found the tree at the right end of the face, where you'd naturally start the climb if you came in from the gorge floor, and I broke a big branch off it, and I dragged the branch across the start of the root, and I scratched another X into the bark of the tree. And then I thought about somebody coming down from above, rappelling, or scoping the gorge from the rim. I couldn't get up to the rim. That would have been hours of going around. But I climbed about 10 feet up the face into the easy stuff with a piece of broken rock the size of a softball, and I scratched 2 more X's into the rock as high as I could reach. So somebody looking down with binoculars would see them too. 2 at the bottom, 2 10 feet up. That's what I left. I don't know if any of that sounds stupid. Probably. It does. A scrambler with a little rock hammer carving warning signs into a cliff in the middle of nowhere. But I needed to do it before I could leave. The hike out took me almost 3 hours. Should have been 2. I kept stopping and looking behind me. I didn't think anything was actually following me. The cave was 60 feet up a face, and I'd watched the opening the whole time I was at the bottom carving the X's, and nothing had come out. But my body wouldn't stop checking. Every 50 feet I'd turn around and look down the trail behind me, and there'd be nothing there, and I'd keep walking. I got to the car around 4 in the afternoon. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before I started it. The keys were in my hand, and my hand was on the wheel, and I just couldn't make myself turn the key. I sat there for 10 minutes maybe, watching the trees on the other side of the dirt lot. Then I started the car, and I drove. About 15 minutes down the Forest Service road, I hit cell signal again, and I pulled off onto the shoulder, and I called the park warden's office. I don't know why I called the warden instead of 911. I think 911 felt like something you call when something is happening, and nothing was happening anymore. The thing had already happened. A woman picked up. I gave her my name. I gave her the GPS coordinates from my watch. I'd marked the cave as a waypoint before I went in. That's what you do when you find a feature. You mark it. I told her there were people in the cave. I told her there were at least 3 of them, and they didn't look right. I said, pale. I said, sick. I said they didn't move like normal people. I told her I thought somebody needed to check on them. She asked me a lot of questions. How did I get to the cave? How was I sure they were people? Was I injured? Did I want to come into the office and make a statement? I told her I'd come in if she needed me, but I just wanted to drive home. And she said that was fine. She had the coordinates. Somebody would look into it. And she gave me a case number. I wrote the case number on the back of a gas station receipt, and I put it in the glove compartment. Then I drove. 8 hours. I only stopped for gas. I got back to my apartment around 2 in the morning, and I dropped my pack inside the door, and I went to bed in my clothes, and I slept until 4 the next afternoon. Nobody ever called me back. I waited about a week. Then I called the warden's office, and I gave them the case number, and whoever answered told me it was being handled, and they couldn't share information about it. I asked if anyone had been to the coordinates, and she said she couldn't share information about it. I called again 2 weeks after that. Same answer. I called a month after that. Same answer. I started searching online. I spent a couple of nights going through news for that area, looking for anything about a cave, or arrests, or somebody missing. I didn't find anything that connected. There was the usual stuff. A bear that got into a campground, a hunter who fell out of a tree stand. Nothing about a cliff. Nothing about a cave. I sent the warden's office an email. I got a polite reply that said they appreciated my concern and could not share information about ongoing matters. I don't know if it was an ongoing matter or if they'd filed my report and forgotten about it. I went back to climbing eventually. Not solo, not in remote spots. I got into a gym and made some friends there and started doing sport routes with partners. Belayer, bolts, guidebook, other people on the wall. I told one of them about it once, after a few beers. He looked at me for a long time, and then he asked if I'd ever gone back. I said no. He asked, why not? I didn't really have an answer. What I told him was that I didn't want to know. What I didn't tell him was that I wasn't sure the X's would still be there if I went looking. About 4 years after it happened, I was looking at satellite imagery of that gorge. I do that sometimes. I tell myself I'm just curious about the geology. Really, I'm checking. Looking for tents, fires, vehicles. Anything to suggest somebody else has been out there. That time I noticed something. Near the base of the cliff, in a little clearing, maybe 40 feet across, that I hadn't paid attention to before. There was a dark patch on the ground. Round. Regular. The mark you get from a fire pit that's been burning long enough to char the dirt under it. The image was from the previous summer. The angle was wrong to see anything on the face itself. The resolution wasn't good enough to pick out my X marks, but the fire pit was clearly visible. I'd been there in the spring. There hadn't been a fire pit when I left. Whoever made it after I was there. I sat at my desk for a long time looking at that image. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the warden and the case number, and how nobody ever came to talk to me. I thought about the 3 pale shapes lifting their heads in the dark, and the one with its knees up by its shoulders, looking at me from under its kneecaps. I thought about the air moving in and out of that opening, and where the back of the cave actually went. I thought about my X's at the bottom of the face, and whether they'd weathered down by now, or whether somebody had taken a hammer to them and chipped them off the rock so the next climber wouldn't see. And I thought about the fire pit. About somebody sitting in front of a fire 40 feet from the base of that cliff at night, with the cave opening 60 feet up above them in the dark. Sitting out there alone, or not alone. Coming and going, bringing things up, bringing things down. I closed the laptop. I haven't looked at the satellite image since. I don't know if they're still in there. I don't know if they ever left. I don't know if the warden went and checked or just filed the report. I don't know what was wrong with them, or why they were living in a hole 60 feet up a cliff face in a part of the country nobody goes to. What I know is, the fire pit was new. The rock the X's were carved into has been weathering for 4 years, and somewhere in the back of that cave, the air keeps moving, slow and even, the way it was the day I put my face in the opening. I haven't been back. I still climb, but never solo, and never anywhere that remote. And I don't go looking at satellite imagery of that gorge anymore. The thing that stays with me isn't the smell, or the climb down, or the way they lifted up out of the dark to look at me. It's the one with its knees up, folded into itself, like that. Because a body doesn't fold like that overnight. A body folds like that because of how long it's been sitting that way. And I keep coming back to the same question I can't shake, which is whether what I saw in that cave was somebody who chose to live up there, or somebody who used to be down here and was put up there a long time ago and stopped trying to come down. I don't know which would be worse. I think about it a lot. I still don't have an answer.
If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. There's always another one coming.